Hello and welcome back to the Spotlight Games podcast. Today, we're going to the fucking ends of the earth to talk about a little game no one has ever played before or heard of because it's the first in the franchise. It's called Final Fantasy XVI. We're going with a bit of a shorter show today. We're going to talk about one thing and one thing only, other than what we've been playing. It's still the Spotlight Games podcast. We're still going to do that whole rigmarole. But joining me as always, my sweet beer drinking dumpster boy, Cayman Darty.
Brother.
Cayman, how are you?
I'm good, man. I'm good. I probably should cut down on the beer drinking, honestly.
You've been drinking so much that your hat now says the word beer on it. And your shirt. Oh my God, I didn't notice that.
Yeah, we're tag team in the beer theme today. Funnily enough, not even drinking a beer right now.
We can change that. We can pause the show.
I stopped drinking for a while we did the move because it was like, man, I don't have it in me to be drinking. And then I drank way too much the other night. And I was like, man, I think it's just put on 15 pounds just in one night of drinking. So I'm gonna switch to gin. The apparently clear liquors. They don't pack the pounds like beer does.
Well, I mean, a lot of empty calories, I'm told, but who counts calories these days? Am I right? Cayman, what a time to be alive. Last week we talked about how there are just fucking too many video games. So it will be on brand for us to just talk about some of those video games today because we have a lot of video games to talk about because this is the Spotlight Games podcast where each week we spotlight the latest and the greatest in the world of video games. You can get it by subscribing or subscribing. Really, you can subscribe or subscribe to our YouTube channel at Spotlight Games Pod or by searching for Spotlight Games in your favorite podcast app. And hey, you can be on the show by tuning in as we record live Tuesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on twitch.tv/Spotlight Games Pod. So be sure to follow us there so that you're notified when we go live so you can be part of the conversation. Cayman.
Yeah.
I'm talking fast. For the fastest lips in the West, they call me.
You live your speech a quarter mile at a time.
Stop it. You know that about me. Look, since last week, I've been playing so many video games. Cayman. There was one day, I'm not going to say which day because I'm not here to incriminate myself. But there was a day where I played Tears of the Kingdom for nearly 15 hours.
Hell yeah, brother.
Cayman. And there's so much to say. But Cayman, before I go off on a fucking bender here in a minute, what have you been playing, brother?
So we're going to talk about Final Fantasy XVI a little bit. So yeah. I'm not going to talk too much about that. Yeah. That is something I've been playing. I also got back in and did a few rounds of old Dead by Daylight with the crew.
Yeah, you did.
It's funny. I haven't played Dead by Daylight in months, Patrick. I tell you, months. The only time I ever play is if Sid's like, hey, I got to go do something. The match is about to start. Can you play for me until I get back? So I don't really play it ever. First game back though, I absolutely fucking just toyed with a nemesis. Man, I made this man feel so bad. That man quit playing.
Ooh, he better have. If he knew it was good for him.
Fucking MVP'd all over his ass. Man, it was one of those, you every once in a while you'll play Dead by Daylight. You'll have one of those matches where you're just like, man, sometimes I'm a good gamer. And it was one of those. The rest of it was kind of a shit show. But the reason I bring up Dead by Daylight, Patrick, I don't know if you know this. Today dropped the beta access for none other than Nicolas Cage.
Hell yes. I didn't know it was today. I knew that he was coming.
So he officially launches for purchase July 25th.
Okay.
So he's currently in beta access, and basically a select few people got access to Nicolas Cage, and it's kind of like a tester deal, right? Where you get to try him out, basically see do perks work, do perks not work, blah blah blah. So
do we need to nerf the power that is Nick Cage?
Basically. And there is a perk he has that could potentially be one of the funniest things I've ever heard of. So first, all of his perks, all of these perks have different names, right? You've got flip flop, you've got unbreakable, you got all these. So Nicolas Cage's though, his first one is called dramaturgy. Okay. And basically, if you look at the killer, you will scream.
That's funny.
And then you will be able to see the aura of the killer for a certain period of time. So that's his first one. He's got another one that's called Co-Star or something like that.
Okay.
I can't remember what it is. It's nothing really to write home about. The one that is though is a perk called Plot Twist.
Okay.
Now, if you've played Dead by Daylight, basically the whole thing is if you get hit by the killer, you go into an injured state.
Yes.
Now, if you play as Nick Cage and you have Plot Twist and you get hit by the killer, you can then just, if you can escape and not be immediately downed, you can actually down yourself and then heal all the way up and be completely healed.
Interesting.
So basically, you just like down yourself just to plot twist and like jump back up.
So to clarify, so instead of being knocked down by the hunter,
yes,
you can just throw yourself down,
yeah,
get a little health back, and make the hunter think that he's knocked everybody down or whatever.
basically, yeah.
Love that.
You all of a sudden, if you plot twist, you now like have basically like a free heal. You just
That's
have to go into like a
fun.
fully injured state.
That's fun.
Which is, it's cool. I can't wait to see it in action. Apparently he's very talkative and he talks actually while out on the map, which I'm not sure if any other characters do that outside of like villains or like the killers do.
Sure.
Like Wesker talks a fuck ton. Hellraiser also is a chatty Cathy. But Nick Cage, he drops like certain lines. Like one of them, he's like, I should have not let my agent pick this movie. This is like really goofy shit.
That's great.
It's, to me, it's like, it's just really fucking funny. I love that they've leaned into it. And I think the thing is, we've back a couple weeks ago, we got a little bit of Evil Dead in. And it's crazy to me is like Evil Dead looks really fucking good. And Dead by Daylight looks so bad. Like it looks so dated. And the fact is, like, the game's on its it just had its 7th year anniversary.
Yeah.
Which is awesome. Like, that's incredible to see a game like that that's not fucking Fortnite have legs to that level. So
do you think we'll get a sequel?
You know, so the developers just launched a new game that just came out, and I can't remember the name of it. But it's like a base building game, and like you try to like break into each other's bases, and like I honestly, the game came out and I didn't hear anything else about it after it launched. So like I don't know what's happened over there. But yeah, I would think like I feel like it will. I say that I feel like this could like run into like the Grand Theft Auto 6 issue or the Grand Theft Auto 5 problem, where you're like, we're still making money. We still have a huge player base. Like, why move?
What's the point?
Yeah. So, but yeah, I definitely think that we will. I think the game runs on Unreal Engine 4. I definitely could see, like, even if they don't do like a full 2, I could definitely see them dropping like Rocket League did and drop like an Unreal Engine 5 patch that makes the game just look a lot better.
Interesting. Okay.
But then if you do that, you're also eliminating some players that could be potential. Well, I guess you're not technically eliminating some players, but like you got a big, foothold in the PlayStation 4, Xbox One era of gamers that are still playing. So like, how do you make that work? And
interesting,
Unreal Engine 5, like, I think if you're going to like really do it the right way, make the game look like it needs to look, like it's not Rocket League. Like Rocket League is kind of Rocket League. The game has looked better as they've added patches and stuff. But like, you can still have like a downgrade patch for other ones. So I don't know how you do it.
What would be cool is if they, instead of upgrading to Unreal Engine 5, if they like downgraded to like cell shaded art, if they just like changed it to like a different art style that would look better across the board technically.
Yeah, and I think that's true. I like that point though, because if you look at something like Borderlands hasn't changed the art style.
Yeah.
But like Borderlands just looks cleaner, more crisp as the games progress through generation. So yeah, I'd be down with a cell shaded look. That'd be fucking cool.
Yeah, that'd be
I think kind of like maybe ruins a little mistake. I have one other thing. I haven't played this game, but I do want to give a quick shout out.
Okay.
To all of our PC players out there, because you guys are the only ones that can play this game. So my buddy Lucas, his game of the year right now, and he's a diehard Legend of Zelda guy. His game of the year is this little game called Dave the Diver.
I've heard of this.
Okay. So,
I've heard it's incredible, but that's all I've heard about it, is that there's a game called Dave the Diver and that it's great. I know nothing about it.
I couldn't tell you a flying fuck about what this game is about. However, he is a huge fan of it and is like, this is my game of the year. This game is fucking amazing. No one is going to play it. Currently only on PC. But from what I understand, you can play on Steam Deck. Like, it actually runs pretty good on Steam Deck because it's not like a big hardware lift. Like he was like, yeah, you can probably just play it on your Mac without any issues whatsoever, like my laptop. So like
I will get this on my Steam Deck to put my Steam Deck to use.
I would love to hear your opinion, because I can't tell you. All I know is it's something about, it's like there's RPG elements. That's what I know.
The sentence on Steam is Dave the Diver is a casual single player adventure RPG featuring deep sea exploration and fishing during the day and sushi restaurant management at night. That sounds great.
That sounds amazing. Yeah, that sounds really cool. So, I think from what I've read, like the developers are working on a console version of the game, but for right now, it's a small indie dev who's releasing it.
Cool.
Apparently, it's really fucking good. So, if you got a PC out there and you're looking for something interesting and a little bit wild, like maybe check out Dave the Diver.
It sounds like Moonlighter. Did you ever play Moonlighter? It was like a dungeon crawler where like the twist on it was procedurally generated, like so often these games are, but what you would go and kill and like, you know, the guts you would get and the loot you would get, you would then sell at a storefront during the day. Cool. So it little, you know, not totally one-to-one per se, but it reminds me of that with the like shop aspect.
Yeah. Have you heard of this game? It was well, I mean, I know you have. It was shown off during the Xbox showcase, and I didn't really pay much attention to it. I can't remember the name of it off my top of my head, but basically the premise of the game is it's set in like this like future world in which these like dungeons have like popped up in Colorado, and they're like adventurers and tourists like are coming out to these like ski resorts to like go into these dungeons, and it's like part like not roguelite, but it's like part procedurally generated dungeons, and then also part like relationship sim where like
fun,
like while you're not dungeon diving and you're like hanging out at a ski resort, like hanging out with people, and then like the more bonds you build with these people, they'll give you more powers, or they'll give you like tips and tricks for certain dungeons that have popped up. Forgot the name. What the fuck is the name of it? But it looks really cool.
Is it Dungeons of Hinterberg?
Yes, there you go. Yes.
So that game, that one, when we did the episode with Mondo, that was in my short list of games that stuck out to me, but I didn't understand what was happening. It just looked really pretty.
Yeah.
So that's why I was like, I feel like maybe you're describing Dungeons of Hinterberg, but I wasn't sure. That game looks awesome.
Yeah, game looks really cool. So there's a bunch of cool like little, and I think that's the biggest issue, right? With like where we are, like what we talked about last week, where it's like there's so many fucking games out right now or coming out that's like a lot of these smaller little indie titles I feel like are gonna just be fucking crushed.
Yeah.
Which is a bummer,
but hey, that's what we're here for, to tell you which ones are worth your time. Like a little game called Tears of the Kingdom. I'll be very quick on this, Cayman, because we all know how good the game is. But there was something in me over the last week that just revitalized my love of this game to the point, as I mentioned briefly earlier, that I played it nearly 15 hours in one day. Because it's so fucking good, man. I'm at 100 hours. I hit the 100-hour mark, and I've completed 3 of the 4 main things. But I feel like at this point, like I still feel like in ways I'm scratching the surface at 100 hours, and that just is kind of mind-boggling to me. So that's all I wanted to say about Tears of the Kingdom. But there's 2 other things that I wanted to mention before we jump into our deep dive of Final Fantasy 16. Little game called Marvel Snap came in. This is one that we talked about a lot last year. It won some sort of a Spotlight Games of the Year award. I forget which.
Game of the Year, I think, for you.
It was up there. It wasn't my actual game of the year, but it was up there. For the first time since this game is released, I've been playing mostly regularly. Like I go through spurts where I'll play it a lot in a week, and then I might not touch it at all. But I hit infinite status this past season that just restarted. So that's the annoying thing about it, is like, oh, well, now there's a new season, so my infinite status has been lost. But I maxed out my rank. I got to rank 100 with a death destruction deck that was just the reason that I've kind of like I've not stopped playing it. It totally is out of like vanity, and that there's this thing where when you upgrade a card to a certain amount, it can unlock like a variant of it. And there's a black and white and a gold variant, but you don't always unlock them. It's like a luck based whether or not you unlock it. And so I have a goal of getting a completely black and white deck and a completely gold deck. And at this point, I'm like 10 out of 12 on both of them. So like I'm close. But their fucking Deathlock keeps in my deck. that I use most often. He won't give me gold or black and white. All of them I have at least one of the two. It's just whether or not I have both. But fucking Deathlock.
So do you just can you just keep like upgrading it like when you hit a certain point to try to get that roll?
So the problem is yes, but the problem is you have to get boosters for them by playing with the card, and each level costs more boosters, and it resets once you hit max rank on that specific card. But like first you have to have 5 boosters, then 10, then 20, then 30, then 40, then 50. And so it's like 150 boosters for an entire like round of one card. And like Deathlock, I've upgraded like 8 times at this point. But so now like I'm in the middle of so I need like what 80 more or 90 more boosters before I see whether or not I even got gold or black and white. So like it's kind of torturing myself at this point, but the loop, man, like it's fun enough that it keeps me coming back. And it's like for me, it's the perfect, like I'm in bed, but I want to keep doing something, or like I'm, in the bathroom, or I'm on in the car or whatever. Like it's just that perfect jump in and out in 3 minutes kind of thing, or 3 hours if you can't stop the loop. But
sure.
And in the last, go ahead.
I'm sorry. That reminds me of your quest for this black and white or gold deck. Did you see the news that there's apparently like 8, I think, Diablo 4 pieces of armor and weapons that have like this ludicrously low drop rate? And someone like
someone finally got one naturally.
Someone finally got one naturally. Here's the thing, though. You have a higher likelihood of being struck by lightning than you are of getting one of these drops.
So this person that got it, they might be hit by lightning any day now.
Any day now.
Wow.
Or plane crash. One of the two, or both at the same time, honestly.
I was listening to an interview with Rod Ferguson, who's the creative lead on Diablo 4 for Blizzard. And he was saying there's this cool thing. Like I love when studios do this, where it's like the first 1,000 people that can get to level 100 on hardcore mode, which means you can't die the whole game. They're putting them on a statue on Blizzard's campus. Like I love when people and like I don't know. I'm sure someone has done it at this point, but they've definitely not hit 1,000 people for sure. So it's something like you can still actively do.
The first person who did it was like a few days after launch. Like this person just grinded forever. And then they lost their hardcore character due to a server disconnect.
No fucking way.
Yeah.
Blizzard needs to just put them on this fucking.
Which also blows my mind. The person did it with a barbarian build, and I'm like, how the fuck did you pull that off? I just paused the game until like you catch up to a point where we can do this together, because we're about to launch into season 1. And season 1, it's like, all right, start a new character to get to do this season, right?
Oh,
and that's kind of what they're doing, which is something new. Diablo 3's was like rifts, and you just could use the exact same character and just Paragon up more and run like even more challenging dungeons. This time around though, they're like, hey, let's do we're doing seasons where it's like kind of like Rocket League or Fortnite or whatever, where you have to $10 to pay for like a battle pass, but like as you rank up, you get like really cool cosmetics and cool shit like that. So like to me, it's like, okay, this is cool. One thing is, I will say, and I don't know if we discussed it last week, but like Diablo's microtransactions are fucking brutal.
Really? I've not looked at it at all yet.
I like, I don't pay for shit if I don't like, sometimes like I will, like Dead by Daylight, like I'll pay for Nick Cage, and like Rocket League, like if I don't get through the season to get enough coins left over to pay for the next season, like I might pay a little bit if I'm that interested in whatever's in the next season. But like just it's all cosmetic DLC, so it's not like anything game breaking, but like it's like $25 to get like an armor pack.
Wow, that's silly.
It's just fucking stupid. And it's some of the bullshit that's like the whole Activision bullshit, where it's like, this is fucked up, guys.
Yeah,
it's fucked up.
I will say, I do want to tip my hat to Marvel Snap to bring it back to that for a second, because they do the season model too. They do this like battle pass model, but as a player, like I align with you, where like I very rarely give games my money outside of buying the game. And like on mobile, if it's like an ad-based game, if I like it enough, I will buy the full version for like $2 or whatever to avoid ads. But I've never historically been the guy that's like, paying every season for something because I like the game that much. But Snap is the first one to ever do that for me, where I think there's been one season so far where I've not paid the $10 to have like the battle pass for that season. And there's been a couple times where I've actually put in extra money for extra resources. And that's the only time I've ever done this in a game before. Like that's how much this game, I like this game so much that at this point I've probably spent over $100 on Marvel Snap because they get you in these like small increments. And I'm like, even saying it, I'm like, man, I'm surprised that this is happening because there's never been a game that's been able to do this for me. But I guess all I needed was Venom on a little card in black and white for me to start throwing money at this developer. Last game I want to talk about, and some people call this a game, some people call it a sport, some people call it the fastest growing sport in America. That's pickleball. Cayman. It's not a video game.
I was going to say there's a pickleball video game, Patrick.
No, this is just your boy Patty is just he's joined the pickleball fanaticism.
Okay.
Friend of the show, Tad. I don't know that you've ever actually met Tad Cayman. You might have. He a friend from college. Got me into it. Like I played it back way years ago in high school, very briefly in a class. But I can't stop playing this pickleball. Cayman. That's all. I just wanted to say I'm playing pickleball. If you're playing pickleball, write in the mail. It's fun. It's
funny. So my little small town that I now live in, I was like driving up the road the other day, and there was like a billboard that was like out that was like pickleball here at the whatever I think it's like at the high school or something like that. During the summer, they're having pickleball. And I was like, oh shit. I was like, I know Patrick's big into pickleball. Pickleball is getting pretty big. Like maybe I go try to burn some calories, play some pickleball.
Let's go.
You know what time people play?
Like 8 a.m. because they're all old.
8 a.m. and 9 a.m. And I'm like, I gotta fucking work.
Yeah.
I can't go play pickleball.
Well, that's the thing. That's what I love so much about the sport so far. Even though I've only played with friends, I've not played against any strangers. But when I do start playing against strangers, they're all like 70 years old. So they're probably going to kick my ass, which is probably going to be kind of hot. But or I'm going to be able to feel like a god.
Oh god,
playing against these grandmas.
Beat these geriatrics to death with your little racket.
Yeah, it's going to be great. So did I talk about pickleball on the podcast last week, Cayman?
I don't think we talked about pickleball last week, Pat.
See, I was going to, but then I didn't. And then I couldn't remember if then you said we talked about it. I was like, but I didn't remember talking to you about it.
We've talked about it.
Okay.
Just the two of us.
Okay. Then I was like, wait, did I just repeat last week's pickleballage?
Well, we've talked about Tears of the Kingdom for like
that's true. And I'm not
14 straight episodes. So like, yeah, it's
but
fine.
Cayman, look, it's been 20 minutes. I'm ready to talk about Final Fantasy 16. Are you?
I'm too, Patrick.
So very briefly mentioned on the podcast last week that I've been playing it, but I hadn't gotten far enough in to really give my thoughts. And at this point, a week later, I've put about 10 more hours in. So I'm about 11 to 12 hours in at the moment. Cayman, how many hours do you think you've put in?
If you've put into 10 to 12 where you are and where I am now, I would say I'm probably 15 hours, give or take in. Yeah.
Yeah. And based on what the internet has to say, seems like we're both within the first third at most of the game. It seems, right? That's what you're saying.
Yeah. So it says, so from what I've read online, I've read online that from where I am in the game, I'm about 30% through the story. And if I'm taking that into consideration with the time spent that they say it takes to complete the story mode to beat the game, this is not do everything. This is just to beat the game. It's apparently about 33 to 35 hours, I think, is to just do story mode.
And that's just Golden Path?
I don't know if that... I think that's probably like mainly Golden Path while also doing some side quests and stuff.
Some side, okay.
And then, obviously, if you're platinuming the game, the estimated time I think I saw was like 60 to 70 hours. Because you have to beat the game twice.
When focusing on the main objectives, Final Fantasy 16 is about 33 and a half hours in length. If you're a gamer that strives to see all aspects of the game, you're likely to spend around 69 hours to obtain 100% completion. This is according to howlongtobeat.com, a website I use often when trying to budget my time for video games.
Sure. That's probably better than me. I don't look into budgeting my time. I just dive in and then realize I don't have time.
Yes.
Um,
But so give me
Yeah.
your thoughts. What do you think so far? You've definitely been because you got it like a few days ago, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
my
you're
beautiful
binging
wife,
a bit.
yeah, my beautiful wife, she was out of town. She was up in Ohio, seeing some family. I stayed back with the animals and to work on the house. Um, and so it was 4th of July. She was like, "Hey, here's the thing. Like, you need to take a day off. Like, actually take a day off and relax."
Yeah.
So I went ahead and secretly downloaded or secretly bought and am already downloading Final Fantasy on the PlayStation because you can do a remote buy, which is like the greatest thing.
That's it. I tell you what.
Yeah. So I was like, okay. So I played a little bit, played a couple hours the first night and played like all day yesterday. And then got a little bit more time in today because I wanted to see what happened before we went into recording. And I'm glad I did that because it definitely sets a very funny expectation for me. But we'll get to that in a minute. The time I put in the game right now, here's the thing, Patrick.
What's the thing?
I think this might be my game of the year.
Really?
Yeah. Okay, so here's the thing. And this is not a knock against Zelda. I think Zelda is a technical masterpiece. Like it pushes the Switch's limits to the absolute maximum. And it introduces a lot of really cool mechanics in Legend of Zelda that like I really vibed with. And it's really cool. It's just a really cool game. But it's also just like Breath of the Wild Super Saiyan, right? Like it's Breath of the Wild. And some people have argued and been like, well, it's more than just that because you also have the underneath, the depths.
The depths.
And I'm like, that's cool. 100% get that.
And the overneath. Don't forget the overneath.
Oh, yeah, it's true. So, like, outside of, like, I mean, the depths, like, there's not a lot down there, to be completely honest with you. Like, and
You're right.
explored quite a bit of it. There's not a lot down there. And it kind of offsets. But, like, look, I get it, man. This is not Breath of the Wild. This is much, much more than Breath of the Wild. And it takes Breath of the Wild and turns it into something, like, different and very cool. To me, though, playing it, I'm like, while I enjoyed Tears of the Kingdom more than Breath of the Wild, I'm still like, it's still very much like I've kind of been here before.
Sure. And we've talked about on the podcast before how Breath of the Wild is definitely not your favorite Zelda.
Yeah, no. And I think the changes they've made in Tears of the Kingdom make me like Tears of the Kingdom more because I feel like it brings in some of that stuff that I like about Zelda.
Yeah.
Here's the thing with Final Fantasy and why I think this game is so unique. It's not Final Fantasy in the same sense that I think a lot of people think of Final Fantasy. This is not the RPG that a lot of people I think are used to. Mm-hmm. Like Final Fantasy has like, you're very much your characters. It not necessarily are going to be very different from each other. This isn't Diablo where like you build like your character is going to be very different than the next person's character, right? It's going to be the same. So it reminds me a lot of like Tales of, right? Like it reminds me a lot of like Tales of Arise, which is historically, as you guys know, I think that was my game of the year in 2020.
I think 2020.
2020, 2021. One of them was my game of the year. And I think the next year was, or no. I think it was like whatever. Doesn't matter. Either way, I fucking love Tales of Arise. I think Tales of Arise is fucking awesome. And this reminds me a lot of Tales of Arise. So I can see people who are like diehard Final Fantasy people being like, I do not vibe with this. This is not my Final Fantasy.
Sure. Hashtag not my Final Fantasy.
And I totally understand that. I think we had like a Twitter conversation with Mondo. And that was part of it where he was like, here's the thing. The game's cool. This is not Final Fantasy.
Sure.
And I agree. It doesn't play like Final Fantasy, but I can tell you where I am in the story. We are now playing a Final Fantasy game, and it takes you 15 hours, which I think is so good. Okay, here's the thing. This is why I fucking love this shit, man. It's very hard to sell someone on the concept of Final Fantasy because unless you're just a JRPG guy.
Sure.
Like, JRPGs are notoriously very difficult to get people into because the story is normally
big wall, large wall of entry or a barrier to entry for sure.
Yeah. And so like, if you don't know to go into it expecting that, and with Final Fantasy in particular, as someone who has categorically like one of my favorite JRPGs of all time is Final Fantasy X. It's like I couldn't explain that story to you outside of the fact that like a lot of this revolves around the fact of like the sins of the father are passed on to the son, and the
Yeah.
son has to resolve this, which is a very like time old tale. But like,
Yeah.
just imagine also you kill God at the end, right?
Yes.
Like that's a JRPG.
And sin is like an enemy.
Yes, and sin is your father.
Yeah.
Look, here's the thing.
Yeah. Sidebar.
Yeah. So, but what I love about Final Fantasy 16 is it tricks you. It tricks you, right? Because I can explain what's happening in the story. And that's not normal for Final Fantasy. I should
Sure.
not be able to explain to you what's happening. And this shit is Game of Thrones, Patrick.
It really is. It's so funny. It's like, the conversation with Mondo was interesting. The point he was bringing up was like, the question I think you have to ask yourself is, what is Final Fantasy to you? Which sounds like a silly question, but it really kind of is so many things. It's like, it's a game that, has fantasy in the title. So they're usually like high fantasy in some aspects. They're usually like very thick, like you were saying, with story. Music is also always a huge part of the game. Like their composers and their kind of I guess their ear for music and storytelling by way of music is unlike a lot of other franchises. And then something we talked about last week was that idea of like always kind of pushing the boundaries of the tech that they have. Like,
yeah,
in terms of like putting together the skeleton that is Final Fantasy, like those are the things. And the one thing that like the major difference I think with this game is the combat style. But I do think when you go through every other piece of it, even though the story does make sense, I do feel like it is a Final Fantasy as fuck story, because it's like so like elevated in a way, but also I like, to your point, it feels very Game of Thrones, and it feels like they made a very conscious choice to try and tell like a political fantasy fucking story. And that, I love that shit.
Well, I think that they took a lot from, and I don't want to talk too much because I'm kind of getting into like a third of the game spoilers, and I specifically don't.
Yeah,
want
we
to
definitely don't want to spoil anything.
Yeah, so what I can tell you is that it does appear to me as though that they have definitely been like, okay, we dig the idea of like the political aspects of Final Fantasy VII. So like, how do we take like the like the heart of like Final Fantasy VII's like political side, which Final Fantasy VII is a politics heavy game.
Oh, sure.
It's all about like environmentalism and activism and like what are the extremes of what is a revolution, and a lot of that carries over. And as you start to progress further into Clive's story, who's the protagonist of Final Fantasy 16, you start to pick up on a lot of these. There's a lot of overarching themes that parallel a lot, to me at least, of Final Fantasy 7. Now, that could change, and I can tell you right now,
anything can happen.
Shit's getting in. And here's the thing, and where I am right now, this is what I'm saying is like, the game feels like you're like, okay, there's a lot of Final Fantasy shit mixed with Game of Thrones, but it still doesn't have that like Final Fantasy hook to it. Where it's like, you're going to kill God at the end of this game. Yeah, all of a sudden the game's like, okay, you know what we just did? We just set you this whole world of Game of Thrones up. We set up all these factions and all this really cool shit. Now we're in a place where we're just going to tell you right now, there's going to be a lot of things you're going to be really fucking confused about. And that's what brings in the active time lore that I think you mentioned last week. It's incredible.
Something that I never expected from a Final Fantasy game, which feels dismissive of like the history of Final Fantasy as a franchise, but I never expected something from like a system level to surprise me from a Final Fantasy game, because it's the 16th one. Really, it's actually like the 19th or 20th one with all the different sequels and whatnot.
Probably more than that.
But like, they've been around the block more times than I can count right now, actually. And for the most part, they're all the same. It's only the last few entries that they've started playing with the formula, I think, to stay relevant. But this active time lore, if I don't remember how much I discussed about it last week, but it's essentially a way that you can like pause the game at any point in the story, and it'll like tell you the necessary pieces of information about all of the characters in the scene, the setting you're at, and like what's happening in the story. And it's honestly, oh, how did no one think of this sooner?
It's amazing. And so I think that's a good lead in to like my analogy with Tears of the Kingdom is there's things I think both games have done so far that's like, this is very different. Like, this is something new. We haven't seen this before. In Tears of the Kingdom, it could be like, well, all of these mechanics are brand new, right? And like, cool. The active Time Lord is really the only mechanic I think that's like, this has never been done before.
Sure.
And I think that this mechanic, though, is revolutionary for one particular genre of game. Not that I don't think you could implement this into really anything. I think you should. But like for JRPGs in particular, I'm like, this is what you need to have in every
Yeah.
JRPG.
I think of Xenoblade Chronicles. I think of Fire Emblem. Like this would be an incredible mechanic that would make those games more sticky for people like me who have tried and just can't get into them.
And I think too, like something like Persona could use something like this. I also think Tales could really use something like this. But I think the thing is with Final Fantasy, this is what I think I'm getting from it. That I don't think we've gotten since God of War 3. And that is a game that shines the brightest when it's like, fuck it, gloves off. We're going straight up into like full blown, you're watching a goddamn movie, like size and scale. I don't think we've seen since God of War 3. And sure, we've gotten some really big scale games. Horizon has a lot of really cool moments that are like really big scale. You know, obviously God of War Ragnarok also has some pretty big scale moments. But I think that was one thing that like I feel like I'm missing from God of War right now is that like I don't feel like we have that same grandiose scale of like you're killing Kronos and half of the battle is you running up his arm and like that kind of shit.
I hear what you're saying.
And there are, and I will say, like some of these bigger moments of like some of these huge boss fights, and these things are fucking wild in scope and scale. I feel like a lot of times it basically puts like training wheels on you, and are like, okay. And now, from what I've heard, it's essentially like where we are right now is like, okay, this is the prologue. This is getting you comfortable with how this game is going to function.
Yeah.
And then the training wheels kind of come off. Like,
I hope so, because I will say this is something, you know, if you play the demo or watch video from the first 2.5 hours of the game. So I don't feel like this is necessarily spoilery, but in one of the very first moments of the game is essentially like you in a Godzilla fight.
Yeah.
And
kaiju battles.
Right. It's a kaiju battle. And that in the demo and like in that first part of the game was like objectively not fun. And so I was really concerned that the rest of them would feel like that. I don't know how many there are, but I'm going to assume that there's going to be several.
Are you talking about the Ifrit Phoenix fight?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so that one I was like, this just doesn't feel fun. And I worry that if there are more like this, that they're going to feel like this. And so, but I've not gotten there, so I'm not gonna like judge the rest of the game yet until I get to those moments.
Okay, so
right?
I'm not gonna. This is not a spoiler. Last boss fight I got into straight up was like kaiju battle meets Nier Automata.
Interesting.
and then it was like glove. It was like glove. At that point, it was completely gloves off.
Yeah,
and it was like you are. It was like and there was another moment earlier too. There's another kaiju big boss man battle.
Yeah.
Big man Japan kind of shit where it was like you're like running through as your dominant is what they're called. So in previous Final Fantasy games, they're normally called like summons. So basically in this one, you inhabit these summons. And so every character has like your standard summon, or not every character, but most big story beats. Like the summons from previous games are the dominants. It's confusing. It makes sense if you know what I'm talking about, or if you're just watching it live, but trying to explain it is a little hard. But either way, you're fighting and your element is flame or fire. And so I'm like running and I'm noticing that all of these trees are catching fire as I'm
Yeah,
running
yeah,
past.
yeah,
And I was like, that is so like little things there are just
for
so
sure.
fucking cool. But like once you start to add in, this is the I'm not even gonna like God of War has an amazing soundtrack. And God of War Ragnarok had probably an even better soundtrack. I think Final Fantasy 16 potentially has the best soundtrack, like orchestral
Hmm.
score of any video game. It is like every time you're like in one of these moments, there's one moment that I think is really cool, and it's like right a little bit past where you are right now, but like you're just kind of running through like more of an open area, and some shit's not good where you are, and
Hmm.
there's a lot of little things that happen around you. They're like, oh wow, this is like, and it's really important in the story of like just how poorly treated and mistreated a lot of these characters in this world are.
Yeah.
Um, and so the score as you're going through, and I'm like, what? Like, I didn't really catch on to like I get that like all these people are like these bears who are the ones that have magic in the world are enslaved, and like this one particular town mistreats them, but like, and they kind of tell you that, but like, you go out into the field and you're like running through, and it's like, oh my god, like this score is so eerie and just dark and heavy, and then you do a side quest, and you're like, oh my god. And you're like guts. Like this game is
Hmm.
dark, dude.
It's so dark, and I'm not quite to the point that you're at. What the scene you're describing, I don't think I've experienced yet. But I the most notable thing for me of this game is the score.
Mm.
I feel like every time I turn around, the score is like really surprising me and how fucking good it is. My only complaint, and this is a bit of a silly complaint, but hey, that's what we're here for. I can tell it's not a lot like an actual orchestra.
Mm.
Like I'm not. It's not like real instruments. It's like it seems like it's all like engineered. So at times, like it would be really cool if it was like an actual orchestra. But honestly, it's so good, it doesn't really bother me that much. Like I think the music is so fucking good in this game that I just there are times when I'm going around the like semi-open world parts and I'm just like standing listening to the music because it's so fucking good. And it's also has this cool effect when you're going through and it's like playing kind of low and then you get into a fight and it crescendos into like battle kind of volume, and
Mhm.
that effect is really it gets me every
Yeah.
time. Like that immediate like hype effect.
Yeah. And I think that's the cool thing too. Like the score is amazing. And I there was some hubbub around some of like the like they were like, why are there no like people of color in this game?
Yeah.
And I kind of now understand why they didn't do that.
Why
The
in your
the
mind?
game the game gets real dark, and I would say, and you know this, but and I'll just go ahead like look here, trigger warning, sorry, but if you didn't know, almost this entire game is all based around the fact that like this is straight up slavery.
Oh, for
And
sure.
I
That's like
could
the main
definitely
theme of the game.
and I could definitely see like there being some issue with the developers being like, maybe not a good thing to put black people in sackcloth clothes getting the shit kicked out of them by white
Sure.
people.
Sure.
And like I like, you know, it's one of those things where I'm like, I kind of understand like there was a moment in time where it's like we have a story we want to tell, like how do you tell it? And it's we live in tricky times. Like, and if you don't feel comfortable like being able to handle that with like the grace and nuance that is required to tell a story like this,
Yeah.
you know, then someone could say like, hey, Cayman, well then why would you tell that story at all?
Sure.
And
Yeah,
then
and
we
I
start
think
to
it
run into like, you know,
yeah,
that
I
kind of
think an
issue.
important thing too. I mean, it's called Final Fantasy, so it's probably obvious, but like it's made in Japan, so like
Yeah.
there's a whole different. We've talked about that on this podcast
Oh
before.
yeah.
Actually, there's a whole different relationship in on it from that country in terms
Yeah.
of like telling stories about race. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's something that I've not experienced much of it yet. So like I've not. That's why I hadn't brought it up because
Yeah.
I have heard this conversation a lot online about centering around like is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? And so yeah, I'm interested to see and kind of start to form my own opinion on it since I've not really experienced any of it yet.
And the thing is too is I think like where I'm at in the story and a lot of what's going on in the story, I don't know if you could like there's a way that you probably could tell this with it being like maybe not centered around slaves and slavery and that kind of stuff, like people owning people. But it
Yeah.
is like they'll say it multiple times, like you are property to this person,
Yeah.
and it becomes like a big story element. And the whole game is like one of the big overarching themes of the game is like forging your own path, creating your own destiny, and creating a world where everyone's equal. And it's like, yeah, I don't know. It's tough. Like, I'm not in the shoes to say that. What I can say is, like, I can definitely see now because they weren't talking about it. They were very cagey about it. And I can definitely see, like, maybe they're like, I can see why they would potentially not want to go down that route.
Sure. Sure.
Their excuses were like, oh, this is like medieval times. That's why. And this is like a medieval Europe. And I'm like,
Not a great
sure.
excuse, Square.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
now I'm like, okay, yeah, it's kind of difficult to like kind of,
Yeah.
throw that out there and be like, hey, this is, so I can see it. But I think, Patrick, the big thing for me, like, is one, the enjoyment level is just super high. The combat feels so fucking good.
I am coming around on the combat. I had said on Twitter
God.
that the combat was my least favorite part. It still technically is, but I'm having a lot more fun with it now that I have more at my disposal.
Yeah, when you start being able to combo in like some of these absolutely buck wild powers you have, and then zip zapping around with the precision dodge mechanic, and
Yeah.
when you're clicking with the combat, it feels so good.
Yeah.
I think they did a really good job too about being like, hey, you can equip certain items that can make your journey easier.
That is a cool mechanic.
So
With the rings.
Yeah. So I think that's really cool because I used them early on and then took them off. And then like I was like, yeah, you know what? I'm struggling with the whole dodge thing. So I put the dodge ring back on, but like we're switching up my others. And that's my thing. My reflexes just aren't as good as they used to be. And combat can be pretty hectic at times, especially when you have multiple enemies on screen at once. But like when the combat, like when you're in the flow with combat, it feels incredible. It's fucking astounding to look at. There's some set pieces in this game
really
that
gorgeous,
are on, like, to me, the most pretty shit I've seen in a video game yet.
Yeah.
Like there's one part in particular, I think it was one of the big kaiju battles when it's just like you're having to like scale as like rocks are falling around you and stuff. And you're like scaling up this like cliff. And it was it was like, I just stopped for a second because I was like, nothing's going to hit me. I just stopped and the music is playing and I was just like, dude,
yeah,
it's so fucking cool.
I forgot how good Final Fantasy is at the huge scale shit. And this is like, I feel like they've like 2.5 times it in terms of like what they're doing in this game that they've ever done before, which is it's been fun to see. Like now that they have the power of the PlayStation 5, and since this is a console exclusive, like they only had to build it for one thing. Like it's not even on PC. So I think they've said it's maybe coming in the future on PC, but I don't think there's been any Xbox plans that they've said. So you can tell like they put a lot of time into making this game look fucking great. I asked our audience for a couple, if they have any thoughts and impressions. I got a couple for us here. Gregman X, friend of the show, says Sid is the most attractive character in any piece of media ever.
It's true.
I don't disagree. What a handsome man with that beautiful voice. I will say the very first time I heard him speak, I was like, oh, that's the friend character from The Office, the English version, if you've watched that. And so I immediately was like, oh man, that's just that guy. But I've gotten like I've been able to
he's also like he's the narrator in Diablo 4.
No way. Mm-hmm. He is the narrator in Diablo 4.
Two knockout performances.
Yeah.
Dude's on a tear.
Yes, but I'm in now. Like I've left my baggage at the door. Loved the character of Sid. And then Rabbit128, who sadly is not with us today. He's not dead. He's just not in the chat that I know of. He says, no, busy playing Barbie Supermodel until I agree that it is the best game of our childhood. And to you, I say, we didn't put it at number 1, John. But keep playing that game. It's going to click at one point. I promise you. It's going to click. We're only a few weeks out from the movie Barbie. So we might have to revisit Barbie Supermodel here on the Spotlight Games podcast. We'll have to wait and see. Cayman, any final thoughts? We're going to be talking about Final Fantasy again. But any parting thoughts or final thoughts before we wrap up today's show?
Yeah, so I would say, like, for anyone out there with a PlayStation 5 that's on the fence, you're not sure if this is a game you're going to play or want to pick up, there's a ton of games coming out. And I feel like one of the hardest selling points is one, selling someone on a JRPG is really difficult, and for good reason. I think the other hard selling point too is that this game has a 16 attached to it. So there's two big things. One, we've already covered the fact that, like, barrier of entry to this game in terms of the way that the active lore works and the way that the combat is and all this stuff is much easier than I think previous Final Fantasy games. And I think the other part too that's really important to point out is just because there's a 16 on the end does not mean that this is a sequel proper.
Yeah.
Final Fantasy historically has each individual Final Fantasy with a number on them is its each thing. So you've got Final Fantasy X-2. That's the sequel to Final Fantasy X. Final Fantasy 16 is his own game. There's no anything you need to know. If you've played previous Final Fantasy games, there's going to be some little Easter eggs in there that you will catch on to. But if you haven't, guess what? This is, like, honestly, to me, like, this is a great launching point if you are interested in what the world of Final Fantasy is. And I can't recommend it enough. I think it's great.
I do kind of love that the through lines in Final Fantasy games are a thing called a chocobo, and a fucking little fairy that flies, called a Moogle. Like,
dude,
I love that those are the things that connect.
Watching in, like, the opening credit, watching a dude decapitate another dude while riding a chocobo was the most metal fucking shit I've ever seen.
Yes, this game is taking, in terms of Final Fantasy games, taking dark to an entirely new level.
It is.
I'm here for it.
Very violent.
Yeah, I definitely I'm having a great time with it. I'm higher on it now than I was last week. I feel like I'm about as high as I was out of the demo, where I was like, I was really excited to play the game, and then I, like, started playing it, but it's because I just repeated everything, wasn't as excited. But now that I'm getting into new stuff, I've played 3 or 4 hours in the last day and a half. Like, I'm feeling the draw to go back to Alisthea instead of Hyrule right now. Like, I'm going to be playing a lot more Zelda, but it's pulled me in. Friend of the show, Nick, I was texting with him, and I was like, I know it's going to pull me in, but it hasn't yet. Nick, it has officially pulled me in. I'm here now. But definitely I will be surprised if it takes the pole position for game of the year for me. I will not be surprised if it is in my top 3. But I don't know that it's going to crack the number 1 spot, but I got 25 more hours at least. So anything can happen, Cayman. Just like anything can happen when you're listening to the Spotlight Games podcast every Thursday on podcast services, or Tuesday at twitch.tv/Spotlight Games Pod. If you want to follow us on Twitter, you can do that at Spot Games Pod, or on Instagram, TikTok, and here on Twitch at Spotlight Games Pod. Cayman, where can the good folks at home follow you on socials?
You can find me at the Dumpster Boy on Twitter, and that's pretty much it.
There you go.
Maybe one day I'll get a blue sky, but apparently getting into that is really difficult. It's very elitist club.
Apparently, I'm on Twitter at Patrick Schwag. Instagram, I don't necessarily plug on this show, but just go follow the pod on Instagram, Spot Games Pod. And hey, let us know. It's funny. There's so many games to play. Not a lot of news happening. So if you have any ideas that you want us to talk about, any topics or questions you have, feel free to write in, mail at spotlightgames.net, or you can DM us on all the places that we just shared. Maybe we can make it a topic of the show next week. I always like when you guys send us your topic ideas, because they're fun. So yeah, let us know. But hey, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Until next week, it's been my pleasure to tell you about Final Fantasy XVI with my sweet dumpster boy. Goodbye, maybe forever.